This is about promises not kept and a very unusual situation for Exeter Township. You can see here John Piho has made some promises, and these are promises that he didn't break, but he never kept them. And we're going to talk about two key ones right here. And first of all, transparency. Mr. Piho promised transparency, and as you'll see as we go forward in this video, this is anything but transparency. Very few people knew about it, and we'll talk about this later. In addition, he promised to bring back professionalism to Exeter Township's Board of Supervisors. And as you'll see in this video, no professionalism. It just continues to go on. He's continued the policies that were followed by his previous chairmen of the township in the last 2 years, Mr. Vollmer, Mr. Bell, and that is to try to prevent as much communication and information as possible. Much of it directed in my direction. Comments are restricted to 5 minutes, and to have a supervisor's report every 2 weeks, 5 minutes is just not enough time. Robert's Rules of Order suggested 10 minutes, and Mr. Bell and Mr. Gardella and Mr. Vollmer reduced that to 5 minutes. So professionalism has not returned at all to the Township Board of Supervisors meetings. And I'm hoping to get you to listen and watch the next several minutes. I think they'll be eye-opening. Exeter government is hijacked by 3 people. John Piho, the supervisor, Larry Piersol, the manager, and our solicitor, Mr. Schnee. This is about unilateral actions taken behind closed doors to deceive without board approval. The actions, the timing, and the sequence of events will be looked at. We'll also look at emails, contract dates that will reveal the lies and the attempt to cover up their actions. This is where it all started, with the agenda for May 28, 2024 at the Board of Supervisors 7 p.m. meeting. The lies and the deceptions begin here. And you will see under item number 3 under administration, motion to approve independent contractor agreement for the Reading Country Club. This agreement is for the management of the clubhouse and the snack shack only. It all started when Doubletree notified the township that it was severing the RHM agreement starting May 3rd, and it would end in 90 days. At this point, as far as I knew, or anyone else knew, the public included, no contractor has officially been hired at this point in time. And I want you to note that there's nothing in there about the golf course, and that will become relevant later on. We will look at the 90-day notice next, and then the contract, and then the missing pages of the contract. The discussion of who the independent contractor is, we'll find out who that is, and when this contractor actually started working for the township. Okay, here we have the notice that RHM is going to terminate their contract with us. And I use that term loosely. It's not really a contract, but Mr. Schnee called it a contract. You can see the date of this termination letter is May 3rd, 2024. And also note that it's effective in 90 days. So we have 90 days. It looks like Mr. Shellhammer is willing to work with us. Don't hesitate to contact me with any questions and to discuss any open items. So they'll be handling this apparently for the next 90 days. Plenty of time to transition. But you have to ask the question, why wasn't this provided to the board on May 28th? You can look at the share drive. This was not a document that was included in the meeting. We had no idea, or at least I had no idea, that the date was May 3rd and the effective date was 90 days from that. And at the time, who knew? Again, it wasn't information that was provided. It should have been provided by Larry Piersol, the interim township manager, but he failed to provide this information. So why the hurry to approve this contract? What is the rush to hire Dan Hoch when we have 90 days to begin the process of taking over the banquet facilities? This is the Hoch contract as presented to the board on May 28th at 7 p.m. This is a contract that is incomplete, but we'll get to that soon enough. I want to draw your attention to that area in the black box. It's very clear. I'll read it to you if it's difficult to read. Whereas the township manager under Section 61-6A of the Exeter Township Code of Ordinance serves as the chief administrative officer for the township and is responsible for the property and efficient administration of the affairs of the township. And whereas the township manager possesses the power to hire employees under Section 61-6B2 of the Code, and whereas on March 11th, 2024, the Township Board of Supervisors authorized the township manager to take any and all actions in furtherance of the sale of the Reading Country Club. Now, the first thing you might ask yourself is, what is this doing in an independent contractor agreement? Well, this is Schnee. This is Schnee putting things in there. He does quote the ordinance for the township manager's ability to hire employees. The other item is I call it the Schnee clause. It's in many of our contracts, maybe in every contract he makes for us, but it basically says something like this: may take any and all actions in furtherance of the sale of the Reading Country Club. Now, I don't know what hiring an individual to run the snack shack and the clubhouse has to do with furthering the sale of the Township Country Club, but he had that in there. It's an overriding clause. Mr. Pierson has complete power to do whatever he wants to do, and it's been used previously. All he needs say is it's in furtherance of selling the Exeter Township Reading Country Club, and he gets what he wants. Dangerous clause, opens it up for anything. What you also should note, very important, is we're missing page 2 here. And you'll note that it goes from the first page, terms 1, 2, and 3, and then the last page it jumps over to number 7, 8, 9, and 10. Well, we're missing page 2. No one really recognized that. The supervisors never looked at this contract. They didn't know it was missing page 2. That night, Mr. Schnee and Mr. Piersol indicated that, it was his mistake, but there's a subsequent contract to this, which was never provided that night. It was never seen that night by the Board of Supervisors. And yet they went on, in my discussions, there were missing key elements. For example, the term a more delineated set of terms and responsibilities. The responsibilities set out in this contract are very vague, as usual. A liability insurance requirement, and indemnification of both parties. The compensation for expenses, and compliance to applicable laws. These are key elements that are missing in this contract on this particular night. And they voted to accept this independent contractor, the Hoch contract, without ever seeing the subsequent contract, with making a decision to adopt it with contingencies, but never identifying what those contingencies might be. And you have to ask the question about Mr. Piersol, the interim township manager's authorization to hire employees. There's no dispute about that, but this is creating a brand new position, a position that doesn't even exist in the budget. Does the interim township manager really have the power and the authority to create positions that do not exist? Again, this is, in my perspective, a township out of control. And much of this is decided and created by Mr. Schnee, who's basically made the Board of Supervisors ineffective. And they've welcomed it, by the way. I'm a bad guy for trying to bring in some controls and looking at each of these documents from a perspective of making sure that they're adequate and good for the township. But this was the contract that they approved, as bad as it is, and we will look at a couple other things next. The minutes where I ask about recent hires, and we'll look at the final contract that's filled out and signed, and the date that it's signed. And that concludes this particular part of the presentation.
My concern is what we're looking at is not
right. So the agreement that is posted on the website doesn't include the time records, the payment, the relationship of the parties, and some other details that I think largely address Supervisor Hughes' concerns here.
Well, it would have been nice to have that's kind of suspicious. Well, you can fix it. We'll never know if it exists or not.
I believe that would be my fault for, I didn't know there was two different ones.
We should table this agreement.
Yeah, that's what I'm.
You're going to approve something you haven't seen
We
yet?
don't have the correct agreement that we table it.
I don't think there's a need to table it. I mean, I think
That's not up to you to decide.
Make it contingent upon. If we can we'll get the wording right, make it contingent upon.
Yeah.
Go ahead, guys.
And so we can still approve him as a subcontractor.
Yeah.
Subject to executing the legal agreement.
Yeah.
by the township manager, yep.
By the township manager?
Yep.
Okay, all right.
I'll make that motion.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
And Clarence is going to second it. Okay. Basically, what the motion is going to be is we're going to hire Dan Hoch as the independent contractor, subject to the legal agreement being worked out by the township manager. Did I say that?
This is page 2 and page 3 of the adopted minutes for May 28, 2024. This is the official record of business conducted by the Board of Supervisors. And what we need to look at here is some information in here. This is a motion to approve the independent contractor agreement for the Reading Country Club. And here we find out that the compensation will be $50 an hour. That wasn't filled in on the contract, the partial contract that we had, and so it will be $50 an hour. We also know now that Mr. Schnee wrote this agreement and presented it to the board with one page missing. And it's no surprise, or it should be no surprise, he did not have authorization from the Board of Supervisors to draw up this contract. It was never an assignment given to him. and there's a disagreement on how this works, but I can tell you that the board oversees all of his activities, and I don't recall the board ever authorizing him to enter into this contract. Finally, on page 2, before we move on to 3, Supervisor Piho admits it was his idea. He took the action without board approval in a public meeting. This was done behind closed doors, along with the Vice Chairman, Clarence Ham. So you have 4 people that are involved in this deal: Piho, Ham, Piersol, and Schnee, who are doing business outside of the visibility of the public and other supervisors. Let's move on to page 3. You'll see identified weaknesses in the contract, and Schnee admits the contract the supervisor saw was incomplete. That's here on page 3, admits it, and the weaknesses are identified by my review, and you will see the completed and signed contract, which is still vague on these issues. In addition, note here in the first line, the prior version, not the current version, was given to him. So not only was the contract incomplete, missing at least page 2, but it was not the current version. So does that mean that something changed in the first version compared to the second version? We don't know, because we don't have a completed first contract. And most important of all, the current version was never presented to the board. You would expect that if all of a sudden they knew that the contract was not complete and that there was a current revised version, that Mr. Schnee would have it on his laptop, or Mr. Piersol would also have it, and they would present it to the board. The board voted to adopt an independent contractor's agreement without ever seeing the current version, with what I have to assume had revisions. They approved filling a position that did not exist prior to this meeting and was not in the budget, with almost zero discussion
on 2024-27. Motion, next one is motion to approve independent contractor agreement for the Reading Country Club. This agreement is for the management of the clubhouse and snack shack. Larry or me or one of us?
Basically, it would be to appoint Dan Hoch to the position of managing all the events and overseeing the snack shack at a cost of $50 an hour as a contractor, not as a township employee. I don't know what else to really add to that right now. So.
So, can I ask some questions, Larry?
Yes. Go ahead,
Thank
Dave.
you. So, Larry, did you write this independent contractor agreement?
No, I did not.
Do you know who did?
That would be Chad.
Okay. And do you know who came up with the idea of hiring Dan Hoch? Because that was a surprise to me. Do you know who came up with that idea?
I'll take that responsibility, Dave.
So this is a done deal?
Yeah, it was my idea when this all happened.
All right.
It was, we need to do something. We looked around and I said, why not take a look at Dan?
This is a report from the township manager on May 28th, 2024. Some of the items are crossed out because they're not pertinent to what I want to speak about. What you should focus on is the last paragraph or the last thing in that box that just showed up. It is really plays a significant role in substantiating and supporting that this whole thing was a lie. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. This is an important part of Mr. Piersol's report. I asked him if any new hires since May 13th, and he indicates here only what was approved tonight, May 28th, and that was the Hoch contract. It is important to note that in the minutes for May 13th Board of Supervisors meeting, it is mentioned on page 4 of 5 When I ask if Mr. Piersol gave any directions to Solicitor Schnee, he states, "We have confirmation that RHM has terminated the contract." Again, no document was presented to the board that indicated they notified the township on May 3rd. So we had no idea that May 3rd was the 90-day warning. The only instructions to Solicitor Schnee was to review the RHM contract related to their termination. No mention on the 13th was made concerning hiring Hoch or any other action to take prior to the May 28th Board of Supervisors meeting. Further confirmation that this Hoch contract and hiring is suspicious and carried out between Piho, Schnee, and the manager behind closed doors. Do we have any new hires since last?
Staff hasn't changed?
No departures.
No.
Okay. Any new directions or assignments for the solicitor from you?
Not currently, other than what we approved tonight.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, all right.
I presented the unsigned contract with page 2 missing earlier in this video. Here is the signed independent contractors agreement with page 2 finally included. Note the date signed is May 31st, a Friday, and the contract was signed and approved by the Board of Supervisors on Tuesday, May 28th. No work of any kind should have been conducted by Dan Hoch at this point. Liability insurance was also provided and dated May 31st. Further supporting the belief that Hoch had performed no work prior to May 31st. It was never indicated by Piho, Schnee, or Piersol that any work did occur prior to these dates. The missing page. Here is the missing page with significant terms the supervisors never saw. Now, Schnee and Piersol both claimed a subsequent contract was available, but they failed to provide even that at the Board of Supervisors' May 28th meeting. Instead, encouraging the board to disregard the incomplete contract, page 2 missing, and vote to accept it anyway, which they did. Here we have on page 3, Larry Piersol signed the contract. Hoch is on an additional page not shown due to space limitations, simply Hoch's signature on that page. But note the last line in the contract that says, whereof claim parties have executed this agreement on the date first written above. So this attests to the fact that this contract was signed, sealed, and delivered on May 31st, 2024. I want you to keep this in mind as we move forward and look at an email sent by Solicitor Schnee to Jerry Gelliff on the night of May 28th. This is correspondence from Jerry Gelliff to Chadwick Schnee that occurred on the night of May 28th, shortly after the Board of Supervisors meeting ended, and the board had approved entering into an independent contract agreement with Dan Hoch. You can see he emailed Mr. Schnee at 16 minutes after 9 o'clock. And what he did was he asked Mr. Schnee to provide him with the revised contract that Mr. Schnee had mentioned in the meeting, the one that was voted on that night. And you could see from Mr. Schnee's response, he answered Jerry about 30 minutes later, claiming that Larry has a signed copy. This is a signed copy. I just showed you that the contract was signed on May 31st. There was no way Larry could have had a signed contract on May 28th. So clearly the documents that I'm going to present here or have presented to you were signed 3 days later. So this turns out to be a complete lie from an officer of the court and the solicitor of Exeter Township misrepresenting the facts. And you have to wonder why. Why does he do this? This is liability insurance from Mr. Hoch. I wanted to show you this to bring all this together. I've already presented the contract. This is to show that Dan Hoch provided liability insurance on May 31st, 2024. I've enlarged the right-hand corner so that it's easier for you to see. May 31st was the date that he provided this. Same time that they allegedly signed the contract on May 31st. I've shown that to you earlier. And I provide this document as well as the signed contract because it's important to note these documents are signed on May 31st. During the May 28th meeting, we approved this contract offer to Dan Hoch. Under administrative item number 3, it was voted on and passed 4-1. Why are these dates important? Because at the May 28th meeting, Dan Hoch and his wife were already working. Dan's wife was presented with an offer of full-time work at the Snack Shack on May 14th. As you will soon see, Dan Hoch had been working for 3 weeks prior to the May 28th meeting. This was never disclosed. In fact, as you heard, I asked Mr. Larry Piersol if there had been any new hires since the last meeting. He states just this since last meeting, just this one tonight, meaning Dan Hoch. But in fact, he had also hired Hoch's wife, and both of them had started working long before the contract was signed by Mr. Hoch, long before he provided liability insurance. And as you've seen, the thread of lies throughout this. This is where it all falls apart. The moment of truth. The lies revealed. And here it is, Mr. Hoch's first day of employment. This is his report. He says it right here. May 15th, 2024, first day of employment. Disregard this part here. The wrong year. Dan Hoch, May 2025, hours for RCC. I think he got a little bit of ahead of his time. I don't think he's going to be around in 2025. He worked during this period of time with no contract and no insurance. From May 14th, May 15th to May 30th, there was no contract, as we've pointed out earlier. But yet, we ended up paying him $5,768. This is the slide that brings it all together. The lies from John Jack Piho of Piho Engineering. The lies and incompetent contract work by J. Chadwick Schnee of Schnee Legal Services. And the lies of our own Executive Director of Public Works and Interim Township Manager Larry Piersol. What is most obvious, or should be, is that they carry on in the meeting, after the meeting, and in questioning later on as if nothing unusual happened. But it did. This is a documented proof of the 3 of them, along with the support of George Bell and Michelle Kircher, to lie and mislead the public. They made decisions outside of the board of directors meeting, outside of public view. They created 2 new positions, an independent contractor to oversee the food and beverage business, and a manager for the Snack Shack. These were not in the budget. This was to provide a soft landing for Dan Hoch and his wife, who were fired by RHM owner James Boskov. The fraud results in Dan Hoch working without a contract, without liability insurance, and on May 28th, Piho, Schnee and Piersol fraudulently presented to the board and the public item number 3 on the agenda under administrative motion to approve the independent contractor agreement for the Reading Country Club. This agreement is for the management of Clubhouse and Snack Shack. As we went to look at the independent contract, I brought to the board's attention that the contract was incomplete. It was missing page 2, as we previously discussed. They were unaware of this, indicating they never looked at it, and J. Chadwick Schnee of Schnee Legal Services and our solicitor then chimed in and claimed that the recent contract is not available and a subsequent contract existed. However, he failed to provide it, this subsequent contract, and he encouraged the board to just go ahead and approve it anyway, which they did. I asked Larry Piersol during his manager's report if he had any new hires from the previous meeting, and he indicated no, except for tonight's hiring of Dan Hoch. I failed to also, in the meeting, he also hired Dan Hoch's wife as a manager of the Snack Shack, and he failed to mention this as well. In fact, the very next meeting is when our surprise that we found out that Dan Hoch had already been working for 3 weeks prior to the May 28th approval of the contract. As suggested and proved that the fact he was already working for 3 weeks without the contract and liability insurance was not revealed at the meeting on May 28th. The contract and liability insurance was not signed and provided until May 31st. Yet on the June 10th, 2024 meeting, the accounts payable distribution is where we discovered an invoice for $5,768, which is what you're looking at right now, as Mr. Hoch hours are shown for his work for May 15th through May 30th, prior to having a contract or insurance. 3 key people in our government. They cannot be trusted. They made fraudulent claims, they misled the public, and they lied to elected supervisors. First of all, Schnee of Schnee Legal Services. He should be immediately dismissed. And then Jack Piho of Piho Engineering should resign from the board. And finally, Larry Piersol, who with 16 years of service participated in this fraud, should be terminated for cause or, at a minimum, severely reprimanded and removed from any managerial responsibilities. This is a failure of people who the residents of this township elected, are employed, and expected honesty and fairness and truth. But what we've gotten is deception, fraud, and a failure to manage our township properly. I spent a lot of time putting this together. This is a factual documentation of what they did to our community and tried to perpetrate this lie. It's going to result in an enormous amount of money paid to Dan Hoch and his wife, and could end up providing us no benefits whatsoever. Think about this, and please support me and help me get 2 decent supervisors elected in 2025. Thank you.